In this video we're going to talk about variables, substitution, and evaluating expressions. So let's start with what a variable is. A variable is a letter used to represent an unknown value. Usually it's a letter, sometimes it could be something else. So I'll say a symbol used to represent an unknown value. If we don't know what some value is, we can just pick a letter to represent that value. For example, let's say we have a rectangle and we don't know the length and width of this rectangle. So I'll just let W represent the width and I'll let L represent the length. So W is a variable and L is a variable. So some things you should know about how we write variables. If I wanted to find the area of this rectangle, the way you find area of a rectangle is length times width. So maybe you've written it like this before, L times W. Now that we've got variables involved, this multiplication, this x as a multiplication, can get kind of confusing because is it a multiplication or is it an x, variable x? So what we do is we don't usually write that multiplication symbol with an x anymore. Sometimes we write a dot, L dot W. That means L times W as well. But then sometimes the dot can get confusing with a decimal. So we decided, well, let's just put this L and this W right next to each other. And if that L and that W are right next to each other with nothing in between, that means L times W. In the same way, if I had, let's do a different example. Let's say I had something like a 2 with an x next to it. That means 2 times x. If there's nothing between the 2 and the x, it means 2 times x. If I wanted 2 plus x, I could put a plus in there. If I wanted 2 minus x, I could put a minus in there. If I want 2 divided by x, I could write it like that, or I could write it as a fraction. If I want 2 times x, I don't have to put anything in between the 2 and the x. I just write 2x, and that means 2 times whatever x is. Also, if you have a number next to a parenthesis and then some variables in there like that, that means 2 times the quantity 3x plus y. So anytime you have a number next to a variable with nothing between, 2 variables next to each other with nothing in between, or a number next to a parenthesis, or even a variable next to a parenthesis, that means multiply. This means y times what's in this parenthesis. So that's something very important to know when you're working with variables. Alright, let's get rid of this and talk about the next thing, which is the idea of substitution. Substitution means that you're actually going to put a value in for one of the variables. For example, let's say I measure this rectangle and it turns out that the length of this rectangle is 4 feet and the width is 3 feet. So now I can go over here to my formula, my variables, and I can substitute. Instead of L, I know what L is, so I can substitute 4 in for L. W, I look at my picture and it says W is 3, so I can substitute 3 in for W. That's the substituting. If I just leave it like this, it looks like 43, and that's not really what I mean. I mean 4 times 3. So now I've got to have some way to show that this is multiplication. And we've got lots of different ways to write 4 times 3, like we talked about a second ago. We could put a little x in there for multiply, but you're not usually going to see that because x is representing a variable now, and that can get confusing. We could put the little dot. If you put the dot, you got to put it up high so it doesn't look like a decimal. That's perfectly acceptable. Another way you'll see it is you'll see one of the numbers in parentheses like that, 4 times 3. You could also put the 4 in parentheses and not the 3. You could put both of them in parentheses. All these things mean the same thing, 4 times 3. I'm going to go ahead and just put the 3 in parentheses, and that means 4 times 3. So now we're down to the last part, which is evaluating this expression, and 4 times 3 is 12. Now just for fun here, let's go ahead and talk about how we would label this. We've got feet times feet. When feet times feet is square feet, and it's usually written like that, feet with a little squared above it, although you might see it like this square feet, like that. And remember, a square foot is just a square that's a foot on each side. I'm kind of getting off track a little bit here, but that's okay. I brought it up. Let's say this length is 4 feet, so I could cut this into 4 feet. And this width is 3 feet, so I'm going to cut this into 3 pieces here. Pretend like those are straight. So each one of these squares represents 1 square foot. And if you'll notice, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 square feet. Each one of these is a square foot. Like if you were buying tile or something, that would be a square foot of tile. Alright, let's try a different expression. We could do our rectangle again. Do something else with our rectangle. Let's stick with the length and the width. I got L for length and W for width. Another characteristic of a rectangle is something called the perimeter. And the perimeter of the rectangle is the distance around. So instead of tiling it like we did a second ago, we want to put some edging around, or maybe some molding around our room, or maybe it's a frame and we want to frame it or something like that. So to frame this, we'd have to go W plus W, because there's W's on each side. W and W, that's 2 W's. And then we've got 2 lengths. A length plus a length is 2 lengths. And then we'd have to add those together. So 2W plus 2L would be your perimeter. So let's say we know that the length is 5.5. Let's make it a frame. So we'll do 5.5 inches like a small frame, and the width is 3 inches. So to find the perimeter, we're going to substitute the 3. This is the substituting part now. We're going to substitute the 3 in for W, and we're going to substitute the 5.5 in for L. So instead of 2 times W, we're going to have 2 times 3, because the value of W is 3. And 2 times L, the value of L is 5.5. So now we're to the evaluating expression phase, where we need to evaluate the value of this expression. And I'm going to go ahead and bring this in as a little reminder here, order of operations. Because in this problem we've got multiplication and addition, and we have to remember that we have to do the multiplication and division before any addition and subtraction. In this problem then, we're going to want to do the 2 times the 3 and the 2 times the 5 first and get those answers, and then add whatever we got for those 2 answers. So 2 times 3 would be 6, and 2 times 5.5, we can do that in our head. 2 times 5 is 10. 2 times a half would be 1. So 10 and 1 would be 11. Another way you could think of it is 5.5 plus 5.5, and that would be 11. 6 plus 11 is 17, and then if we wanted to get technical about it here, it would be 17 inches would be the distance around the rectangle. Alright, let me make up a couple more that don't really go with a picture, because sometimes you'll see this on homework and stuff where somebody will just give you, or the worksheet will just give you some variable expression like, let's put an exponent in there and some parentheses just to make it fun. How about 6x minus 3y squared plus xy. We'll do parentheses on the next one. So now you'd have to know what the values of x and y were, and that should be in the directions. Let's say they tell us x is 3, and for fun let's throw a negative in here, and y is negative 4. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is substitute. So we're going to take and we're going to put a 3 wherever there's an x over here, and we're going to put a negative 4 wherever there's a y. So I'm going to write 6 times x, and my value of x is 3, minus 3 times y squared. Y squared, let's see, what's y? Y is negative 4, so I'm going to put a negative 4 there, plus x times y. Notice I'm putting the parentheses in because I'm substituting numbers in, and so I have to have something that tells me I'm multiplying. So x is 3 and y is -4. So that's your first step, the substitution. Let's go back and reinforce what we did here. We put a 3 in for x, and we put a 3 in for this x, and then we put a -4 in for this y, and a -4 in for this y, and all the other symbols just came down. This 6 was just a 6, and it stayed like that. That minus just came down, that 3 came down, that plus came down, that squared came down, and we substituted in the values of x and y. Alright, now we're to the order of operations part. Let's see, first thing we're supposed to do is any grouping symbols. We don't have any parentheses or brackets or absolute values. Those are all examples of grouping symbols. I know a lot of people teach order of operations by saying the first step is parentheses, and most of the time it's parentheses, but a lot of times it could be brackets or absolute values that are used as grouping symbols. And actually, if we look at our problem, we do have parentheses, but what we mean by grouping symbols is simplifying what's inside those grouping symbols, getting it down to one number inside the parentheses. We already have that. Inside these parentheses is all simplified. There's nothing we can do inside the parentheses to make it any simpler. Right now, these parentheses are basically here to tell us to multiply. Next step is exponents, and we do have one of those right here, this -4 squared. So we want to do that. -4 squared would be -4 times -4, which is positive 16. So let's bring down the rest of this stuff. We're not going to do anything with all this right now. We're just going to do our exponent, which we did. Now we're into an order of operations problem, basically. We're evaluating the expression using the order of operations. Next thing is multiplication and division left to right. So we have to do all this multiplication. We're going to do 6 times 3, 3 times 16, and 3 times -4. So 6 times 3 is 18, 3 times 16 is 48, and 3 times -4 is -12. And then we're going to bring down these signs here, the minus and the plus. And now we do our addition and subtraction left to right. That's our step 4, addition, subtraction left to right. So 18 take away 48 would be -30, and then we'll bring down the plus -12, which is -42, and that's our answer. Let's try one more and have you try it maybe by pausing the video and trying it on your own, and then starting the video and see if you have it right. Let's go ahead and keep these values for x and y. It could change, but I'll just keep them. You know, the problem might change the values for you. Let's do 2 times the quantity x squared minus y. That's it. 2 times the quantity x squared minus y. So pause it and give it a try. Watch out for your negatives. Alright, let's see how you did. First step is to substitute. So I'm going to put in for x, I'm going to put 3. And in for y, notice I brought my minus down, and then y is -4. This is a big part right here where people might make a mistake. This minus comes down here, and then your y value, I'll put it in green, is -4. So you actually have minus a -4. Order of operations. First thing we want to do is simplify what's in the parentheses. So we have to get all this stuff in the parentheses down to one number, this 3 squared minus -4. What do we do first? 3 squared or the minus a -4? Well, we follow the order of operations and we do the exponent. So the first thing we're going to do is the 3 squared. That's a different color. So 3 squared means 3 times 3, which is 9. And then I think it's a good idea here, we can change this minus a negative. Remember what you do with minus a negative? Minus a negative turns into a plus. So minus a negative is +4. Now we can continue with our grouping symbol, simplifying what's inside the parenthesis. We get 13. So 2 times 13, and 2 times 13 is 26. And that would be your answer. Some of you, I'm wondering if on this step right here, you may have done this a little different and actually distributed the 2. Some of you might have done that. Can you do that? Is that okay? Does that give you the same answer? Well, let's see. If I do 2 times 19, I get, or 2 times 9, I get 18. And 2 times 4, I get 8. And 18 plus 8 is 26, which gives you the same answer. So you can do that. You could distribute right there. Generally, you don't distribute in the cases where you can just simplify what's in the parenthesis, because it's usually easier to just simplify what's in the parenthesis and then multiply. The problems where you have to distribute is if you have something like 2 times x plus 4. Now I can't do what's in the parentheses. I can't simplify that, so the only way to get rid of the parentheses is to distribute the 2 and get 2x plus 8. You see the difference there? If you cannot simplify what's in the parentheses, then distribute. If you can simplify what's in the parentheses, then go ahead and do that. It's usually going to be easier to do it that way. Alright, so in this video we learned what a variable was, which is this number used to represent, a symbol used to represent an unknown number. And then if we tell you the value of that number, you can substitute that value in for the variable and then evaluate that expression using the order of operations.